Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. And the first hour programme of this year, in fact, all the programmes, the rest of this year will be a full 60 minutes long. And although we've had a hard winter and a very late spring, the sun is warming the air as I speak, and the garden is bursting into life. And I do realise that I need to get on with some of these winter jobs, like pruning the buddleias, which normally I might have done a month or so ago, but the combination of snow and ice and wind and rain and maybe just a little bit of laziness has meant that I've got behind. So I'm cracking on with those. On tonight's programme, Carol celebrates the seasonal beauty of camellias.
They adorn the dank, dreary garden with these gorgeous, voluptuous, brilliant flowers.
We meet a gardener who went on holiday and fell in love with a plant.
If you walk out on a summer's morning and spot the campanulus flowering, it really will put a smile on your face.
And I shall be planting a spring flowering shrub in the orchard beds, as well as making a start on the new Paradise Garden. A few weeks ago, I covered this bed with fleece and I put some cloches on another bed to try and warm the soil up. And since then, we've had about 18 inches of snow, we've had really cold winds, and it's important to try and keep the soil a little bit warm if you want to get going and planting and sowing now. Now the fleece obviously lets moisture through, but it is very effective at just helping warm up what would otherwise be quite claggy soil. And these raised beds are much better for drainage and warming up than the other beds. These will be ready 10 days, even 2 weeks earlier than a normal bed. And if you just feel the soil and it feels cold to your fingers, then it is too cold to sow or plant, and that's a really good rule of thumb. However, that is fine. And I'm going to put some rocket in here. Now, I have a confession to make to you. I had prepared some rocket that I sowed in January. We then had all that bad weather, they sat in their plugs too long, and the result is that these have bolted. So that's a pity, but I'm not going to throw this away. I will plant a cup between watercress and rocket. Now, I know I've said this lots of times, but if you're new to raised beds, the first, second, and third rule you must follow is do not stand on them, ever. Because the whole point about a raised bed is that you don't have to dig it and it doesn't compact. So, use a board, and we will plant these out. And you can see I've used a plastic plug tray, which is broken. So I will chuck it away and not buy another to replace it. I'll use an alternative. I'm planting these about 6 inches apart. There might be a slight temptation to ditch these because there's no way back once things start to go to seed. However, with rocket, it is worth keeping them because although the leaves are smaller and they're not so subtle in taste, they're still good, they're still very edible, and will take a lot of re-picking if you grow them as decent sized plants. But I'm not going to plant them all out by any means, just one more row, and then we'll sow some seeds. Now what I can do with these is just nip out the leading shoot. So if I cut that back, and take that back, I'm cutting the main stem right down to the bottom rosette of leaves. This won't stop the process of going to seed, but it will delay it and put more energy into the foliage. I am going to sow more rocket. I've also got landcress. Now, I've grown landcress for years, but I don't think many people do. Sometimes known as American cress. It's got that distinctive peppery taste, belongs to the brassica family, and as well as tasting good, It's one of the few plants that will germinate in cool soil and likes fairly cool, moist weather. Ideal for March, April and into May, and then you don't grow it again until the autumn. The seeds of all these plants look very similar. They have a distinctive round shape that you get in the Brassica family. I'm just going to flip that over, and that will give me the spacing. Just run a drill along and down that side. As with all seed sowing, nice and thin. There we go. These will germinate quite fast and will be ready to eat in about 5 weeks' time. Just cover up the seeds by running my fingers down either side of each drill and obviously label them. And the other rocket, which I'll plant out in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, will come through, and then I'll sow some more rocket indoors, and we'll just keep that succession going. And if you can plan ahead and organise your salad crops so that you always have some ready to harvest and some coming through, there's no reason why you can't pick some salad leaves 365 days of the year. Give them a good soak and keep them well watered. It will respond to drying out as rocket does by going to seed. I started growing vegetables very young. In fact, it was my entry into gardening, and in many ways it remained my first love. But looking back, I realised I was incredibly lucky to have both the encouragement and the space. And when I got older and bought my own house, there was a garden and I could grow things. But increasingly, that is becoming very tricky, particularly for younger people. And Frances found herself in precisely that position. A desire to garden, great knowledge, but nowhere to grow veg. Well, she's come up with a solution.
Allotments. A simple patch of earth with endless possibilities. We Brits have a long history of growing our own, from the prize-winning vegetables to the odd mistake. From a young age, I have fond memories of helping my mum on her allotment, and I've always wanted to take on one of my own. But it hasn't been so easy. In fact, it's been 5 years now, and like many people up and down the country, I'm still waiting. But today, that's all going to change. Over the course of the year, I'm going to become part of this allotment community in Bristol and discover the highs and lows of growing your own fruit and veg. I'm meeting fellow allotment newbie Luke Murray, who's agreed to let me share his rather challenging plot. Hi, Luke.
Hi, Frances. How you doing?
Really well, thanks. Love the allotment.
Thank you. It's getting there.
In return for my help, I get a section to call my own. So you've had it for a few months?
Yeah.
What was it like when you kind of first got here?
So it's totally overgrown. I had brambles all over here. I've found a couple of raised beds at the back, which was great, but kind of again had to clear that. That was all like grass all the way up to a bit of a jungle, really.
So I kind of like left you with all the really hard work, and I've just come along, but it's all ready to grow things in.
There's going to be plenty of hard work, don't worry. We're on a huge hill. Anything getting up here is hard work.
That's very true. Were there lots of plants here then already?
Yeah, it was pretty good actually. I was quite surprised. So I've got
good. I love any soft fruit. That's good.
And I've got what I think is possibly a plum tree.
It could be a cherry or a plum, prunus of some kind.
And yeah, and some of these I've kind of found herbs and strawberries, and
nice.
There's a lot of kind of ifs and buts and maybes at the moment. But I think once they've got leaves on them, hopefully together we'll have a bit of a better idea of what's
Definitely.
going on.
Do you have a plan in terms of planting and areas for certain things? Or?
I want lots of perennials, so it's kind of having the soft fruit bushes and the trees and building a space that is, once we've kind of got that hard work in, we can kind of just each year just come in, trim in and kind of keep it on top of, so it's not, you know, so it's not an absolute kind of market garden kind of thing, and impossible to maintain.
Yeah.
But then also having some annual beds that are a bit experimental and kind of just putting stuff in and hoping as much of it survives as possible, then figuring out what works with the soil, really.
That makes sense. And do you have a space that you don't mind me being let loose on?
So this amazing sea of black plastic is, I think, what we're going to go for. Absolutely no idea what's underneath. I haven't lifted it yet. I'm excited to find out. Could be all sorts.
Should we lift it?
I think that sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
I'm nervous. Ooh. Wow, look at that. That's really good, isn't it?
Bit of a result. That's fantastic.
You have things like bindweed. If it was going to be a no-dig perennial veg bed, definitely get that out now. Having said that, if this is an annual bed, you will be digging it up or pulling things up every year.
Okay, great.
There's quite a mix of things in here, isn't there?
Yeah.
But if you look in here, it's a mixture of strawberries
Oh, great.
and your cinquefoil. So the potentilla.
What is it?
It's potentilla, so it's very closely related to strawberries. You can see the slightly different leaves, but we're going to have to be careful when we weed this, not to dig up and kill the strawberries whilst we do it. Right, we're going to need a fork to really get this proper. And there we go. Tiny weed on top, all of that root. With annual weeds, the golden rule really is never let them go to seed. If they go to seed, you'll have weeds year after year. A really good way of telling what kind of soil you have, whether it's sandy, silty or clayey, is just by rolling it around. If you can roll it into a sausage, like that, then it's a silt or a clay. If you can't roll it, then you have a sandy soil. And if, once you've made that sausage, you can turn the two ends so that they meet without cracking, then it's definitely a clay that you have. And that's what we have here, a really heavy clay. It's always a good idea to check your soil. So I'm going to use a soil pH testing kit. It's simple. Add soil and water to the powder in the tube. Put the cap on. When it's done, compare the colour to the pH chart. Well, I've waited a couple of minutes and that is a really good result. Green means neutral, and in terms of what you can grow, that really gives maximum opportunity, so I'm pleased about that. One of the really great things about allotments is the people around you that have worked here for ages, and there's so much history here. So I want to find somebody to get some extra advice before I really begin on this plot. Maggie Moss oversees these allotments as well as looking after her own, so she is the perfect person to speak to get a lay of the land. What kind of things work well here? What kind of things don't work so well?
Things that are really good, beans, any kind of beans, courgette, squash, soft fruit, potatoes do well, leeks, onions, they're all good.
So there's a big variety, really.
Definitely.
Are there any big things to avoid or things to make note of?
Well, I think the key thing is that this site is really heavy clay, but it's very fertile. Keep off the soil if you can, because if it's really heavy, you compact it. So don't stand on the soil. Add as much compost, as much extra material as you can. You know, you really want to be getting the soil loosened, so you want to be adding. Just keep on top of it.
I think I have my work cut out. But thank you very much, Maggie.
Good, nice to meet you.
You too. What's so exciting about this allotment space is that you can rent a section of their communal polytunnel. So nice having a space like this, because it means that even with all the cold weather we've been having, I can make a start and actually grow some plants. So I have some seeds, and I can bring them all on in here, which means it'll be nice and warm. So I think no allotment is complete without some tomatoes and some chard, just for its aesthetic, but also its taste. I love chard. And I also have some rather interesting, a cross between a Brussels sprout and a kale, which means the leaves and the sprouts are edible. So there's quite a nice mix here. Hopefully Luke and I can find a good place to put them. Well, it's been a really good day, but quite a hard day, and seeing the plot I have, it's going to be a hard work plot to maintain, but that's good. And seeing all the people around that they do it every year is really quite humbling. I'm just looking forward to the weather getting a bit warmer, so I can actually begin to get some plants in, which is when it gets very exciting.
We will be paying repeated visits to Frances on her allotment to see how it progresses. And I have to say, I think that seeing such energy and enthusiasm, people sharing an allotment, is absolutely fantastic. A couple of years ago. And it is obviously a huge space to fill with plants. The trees give it height and structure. But if I just had herbaceous perennials and bulbs, it would be terribly flat. And the way to fill that big space between knee and head height is by using shrubs. I've already planted quite a few shrubs. There are a lot of roses, hazels, I've got begonias. I've got a Viburnum plicatum marizii, but I've got another plant which I'm adding in today. And this is another viburnum, but it's a different type. It's Viburnum opulus rosea. And this is the Guelder rose, a great snowball of white flower that will appear at the end of May. It's sterile, so it won't have any berries, but it has really good autumn colour. You can see it's a bit of a tangle of branches, but never prune this when you plant it. The time to prune a Guelder rose is immediately after flowering. So end of June, early July, you can cut it back. But the beauty of this viburnum is it's very adaptable to soil types. Now you see that's a very nice plant. Just break that up a bit to stimulate the roots. Now I'm going to add some mycorrhizal powder. And the idea with the mycorrhizal powder is just to sprinkle it directly onto the roots and onto the bottom of the hole, because you need to make contact. And the powder is merely a medium for carrying the fungus. Now, it feeds off the sugars of the roots of the plant and acts as a conduit to feed moisture and nutrients from the soil into the plant. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And what that means is that a plant like a shrub, a woody plant, will establish much quicker. When you're choosing a shrub, you really have to think about what it would like for its growing environment. You want plants that are really happy to be there, that like the soil, like the amount of light or shade, and therefore thrive. And most gardens, even very small ones, have enough variety of position, be it east wall or west one, or a slightly damper bit, or one that's more sheltered, to have a really good variety of plants. You don't need to try and grow plants that don't want to grow in your garden. Don't hold back on watering. Give it a really good soak, and don't let it dry out for the first year either. If you have a very hot, dry period, give it a soak once a week. I will have to wait. One of the flowering shrubs that is at its very best is the camellia. And Carol is celebrating the camellia and seeing it in all its glory.
As winter gradually ebbs away and we sense the first gentle murmurings of spring, there's one plant that announces with a clarion call the new season's here. With its glossy foliage and its big voluptuous flowers, it's the camellia. It originates in Asia, and thousands of years ago, the Chinese discovered that the dried, stewed leaves of the plant Camellia sinensis created a delicious hot beverage. Of course, I'm talking about tea. But camellias aren't all about tea. In the early years of the 20th century, great plant hunters like Ernest Wilson and George Forrest brought the camellia to our attention as an ornamental plant. And today, they're one of our favourite shrubs. When camellias were first grown in Britain, they were definitely the preserve of the rich. They'd all be grown in glass houses because people believed that these exotic, gorgeous blooms needed protection. And it wasn't until glasshouses began to become dilapidated during the war that these plants were exposed to the elements. They didn't die, they lived, they thrived, and people began to realise that they were a lot hardier than they'd originally thought. And it was at this point that camellias began to pass into general cultivation, and us gardeners realised that we too could have camellias in our gardens. There are more than 250 different species of camellia, but it's the hybrids that are amongst the most common in gardens up and down the country. None more so than Donation, a pink semi-double. It's an easy plant to grow. It's one of my favourites. Lots of us have got it in our gardens, no wonder. It's prolific, it's dependable, and each of these flowers is truly beautiful. There are all sorts of different flower forms in the Camellia family. Personally, I love the single ones. They have a simple grace and elegance, and I find them much easier to incorporate into a garden setting. This one's Adelina Patti, and you can always see that central boss of stamens. Once you've got a camellia in your garden, you'll undoubtedly want to make more. And it's really straightforward to do. You can just take cuttings. Here's a nice shoot. Lovely new wood, all made during the last year. And you can tell that because it's quite bright in colour. It's almost reddish, in comparison to the old wood, which has already taken on a greyish tinge. Then take a sharp pair of secateurs and aim just where the old wood meets the new wood, right above a leaf bud, so that you're not damaging the plant in any way. That one's ideal. Now I've got a pot full of lovely gritty compost. Each cutting is going to consist of a piece of stem and one leaf with a little leaf bud tucked in that axil. And I'm cutting right in here, right across there. So that's my cutting. So I've got leaf bud, leaf and a piece of stem. You just want to make sure that the top of the stem and the leaf bud are resting on the surface of the compost. Now it's that leaf bud that will actually make the new shoot, and the roots will be formed underneath the surface of there. So I'm going to take 4 or 5 more of these. When all your cuttings are in, just finish it off with a fine layer of grit. It'll retain the moisture, it'll make sure weeds don't grow, and it will also protect the crown of your cuttings. And they're going to stay in there probably for several months. And when you start to see roots protruding from the bottom of your pot, you know you can knock the whole thing out and pot them individually for new camellias. This camellia is called Inspiration, and that's surely exactly what camellias do. They inspire. Although you can guess, they adorn the dank, dreary garden with these gorgeous, voluptuous, brilliant flowers.
The one camellia that I can grow here is not yet in bud, so it's really nice to see such an extraordinary collection of them in full flower. Now, camellias may not grow very well at Longmeadow, but Nepeta grows almost too well. And this is a member of the mint family, so it's very vigorous anyway and will spread. I've got a variety here called Six Hills Giant, which is exceptionally tall. And what happens in our rich soil is that it grows really tall and lush with lots of foliage and good flowers, and then flops all over the place. So all the plants around it tend to get swamped. And like all herbaceous perennials, when you start to see healthy, vigorous new growth, it's the best time to move them, divide them, if that's what you want to do. If I just dig up a clump like this, and then I'm going to divide it. And the root system is really substantial. It's quite heavy. And the best way to divide that is to simply chop it. There we go. Now that section I'll put back. I can then fill around it, and that will very quickly fill up the space it had. And I've got another really good clump, which actually I can divide again to make 2 more. central section here, the most woody section, and you can see the woody roots there, is the oldest, and I can discard that. I can chuck that away. Whereas the outer bits, on the outside part of the plant, are the most vigorous because, like most herbaceous perennials, its inclination is to grow outwards, and in time it leaves an empty centre like a donut. So that is a healthy clump which I can replant elsewhere. By and large, herbaceous plants are tough. So a little bit of digging up, breaking up, is not going to stop them. I think Nepeta would look really good underneath these 3 yellow roses. Now, to do that, to clear some of the forget-me-nots out of the way. So let's make space here. Whenever you transplant or divide a herbaceous perennial, do give it. Now, whilst Nepeta is certainly robust, if not a bit of a thug, not all the summer-flowering perennials are like that. One of the more elegant and charming ones is Campagula, all shapes and sizes. And last summer, we went to visit the National Collection in Suffolk.
I love Campanulas for their irresistible charm, their dainty looks, although they are tough. They're a tough breed. I love the blues, the purples, through to the white. I've just come to love them dearly. I first saw Campanulas when I was a student in Italy, and I regularly visited the Dolomite Mountains, and there are 1 or 2 endemic Campanulas to that part of the world, and I saw them in little crevices by the paths. They were just like little jewels. I realised then they must have been great doers and would be good plants to grow. When I decided to apply for the National Collection of Campanulas, I was squeezing them all into our cottage garden, and I realised that it wasn't going to be long before I needed more space. The walled garden here at Langham Hall needed a custodian. I came to see the then owners and asked them if I could come on the condition that the Campanulas came too. And luckily they agreed, and the rest is history. They love it in the walled garden. They get some protection from the walls, but also they love the open nature of it, light all round, and they flourish here. With Campanula, there are hundreds of different varieties and species, but really you can divide them into 2 sections. We have the herbaceous Campanulas, which are more suitable for borders, so they tend to be taller, anything up to 4 or 5 feet. And then we have the alpines, which form my collection. They are low growing. They have 5 petals and 5 stamens. Some are star-shaped flowers, but generally the flower is bell-shaped. Their common name is bellflower. This is Campanula rotundifolia, our native harebell, or bluebell in Scotland. I love this because it's so versatile. It does grow as far north as the top of Norway into the subarctic. So you can easily grow it from fresh seed in July, or just let it sprinkle its seed around where it is, and it will reward you with many flowers all the way through the summer. Whilst this might look like a herbaceous Campanula, in fact it could be classed as an alpine, as it hails from the high scrubland areas of mountain regions. It's Campanula trachelium, the nettle-leaf bellflower, or bats in the belfry, and I love it because it's such a good doer. It will grow in shade here under the tree, and it's good in those rough places, poor soil, sun or shade. This is Campanula stansfieldii, another one of my top picks. Suitable for containers because it just flowers all summer long. What I do with these is regularly deadhead, and when it looks like all the flowers are finished, cut it right down to the base. Liquid feed, always recommended to keep them going in containers, and it will spring back with fresh foliage and another flush of these pretty deep violet pixie hats in August and September. Everyone should have campanulas in their garden, particularly the alpines, because they will fit into a little corner and shine out and give you so much pleasure. And if you walk out on a summer's morning and spot the campanulas flowering, it really will put a smile on your face.
I do love campanulas. And actually, I think the ones that would be really exciting to grow are the alpine ones, which I can put in a container or even a stone trough. So I'm going to do that this year. Now I'm just adding, not campanulas, but a few euphorbias here to the jewel garden. This is Euphorbia martini, and it does well for me. It's got a really good combination of this electric zingy green flower and then the burgundy, slightly pinkish colour to the stems and the foliage, which is perfect here for the jewel garden. This is sold in a coir pot, which is great, but there is a slight quandary about how best to treat this. Do you plant it still in the pot, because the roots do grow through, you can see that, or do you try and take it out of the pot, which will free the roots up, but will damage them to a certain extent? I think, having tried both over the years, that there is a halfway house that works best, which is to cut the pot before planting. If you get a knife and just cut down a bit, don't worry about damaging the root. So that is going in the ground. Poplar. These will grow about 3 foot tall, with a spread of about the same, depending on the soil and the situation. That's good. I do like euphorbias. Now, still to come, Adam visits a garden that is tropical and exotic and in Dorset. But first, Nick helps us get to grips with those bits and pieces in our garden that we should have done by now, really, and who knows, we've all got those, but will help us go into summer really well equipped and ready for anything.
With spring in full swing, us gardeners are getting ready for the year ahead. But a quick look into the potting shed can be a bit daunting. The old seeds, the mouldy bulbs, the block tools. But actually, getting all your gear ready for the year ahead is much easier than you might think. Now, we're all guilty of shoving things in the glass house or the potting shed at the end of summer into winter and forgetting about them. One of the most common things is old packets of seeds. People often ask, are they still going to be viable after they've been sat in a glass house or shed? Well, the answer's a mixed bag. Things like sweet corn, for example, doesn't have particularly long life, so after a year or two you won't get much germination at all. However, leafy veg, say, like lettuce, is much more likely to germinate for up to about 6 years. And one of the best ways to keep the seeds really fresh is to put them into sealable plastic boxes in the fridge. But you don't want any moisture to build up in there. So you can just use these little packets of silica gel. You often find them in camera lens cases or binoculars, but you can buy them from a hardware store. And it will keep these seeds viable for up to about 10 years. Now, another thing that lots of us tend to have hidden away in our garages and glass houses is old containers like this that maybe had bedding plants in last year. You can do lots of stuff with this soil. You can add it to your compost heap, you can add it as a mulch to your beds, or you can actually clean it up, rejuvenate it, revive it, and reuse it for this season. A word to the wise though, what I'm talking about here is reviving your compost to use it again for general growing or for container growing of display plants. I would never use this for growing seed. There are various different products you can use. Organic forms like this, fish blood and bone, and then something like this granular product is great because it will release the NPK nutrients, so that's nitrogen, potassium and phosphate. Some will release really quickly, others will be in about 3 months' time, and then some will be in about 6 months. Now, one other thing to bear in mind, it's worth checking if you've got vine weevil larvae in there. If you suspect there may be problems, then just treat them with nematodes through the season. You're going to need your lawnmower in its best condition to help you cultivate and enjoy a beautiful trim carpet of grass later this year. Before carrying out any maintenance on your mower, make sure it's unplugged or the spark plug cap has been removed. After a season of hard work, mowers can look a little bit bashed around, so it's well worth getting the blade out and giving it a sharpen before the start of the season. Just use a basic spanner, and you can see there just how soft the blade is, so it's literally just bashing the grass rather than cutting it. The other thing to think about is the deck, particularly with a hover mower. It needs the air to circulate well underneath so it can do its job properly. And so you can just use a trowel or a similar hand tool and scrape all of that rubbish away. It can go straight onto the compost heap and the machine will be much more efficient going into the new season. Now, time to try and sort out this sad looking blade. Few things I need to do to get this blade back into a decent workable state. To start with, I'm just going to give it a brush off with a wire brush to get the worst of last year's debris out of it. Then it's simply a case of getting it into the vise, secured and ready for filing. Now I'm just going to use an old steel file. You don't need anything fancy and that will do the job. It'll take a little while, but it's well worth it. You can see there, even after just a few minutes, we're starting to cut back in to that steel and give it a really good edge again. I'm going for about sort of 30 or 40 degree angle roughly on here. It will get bashed up during the season, but it's worth getting it right now. Something that's really worthwhile checking as you go is that the blade is balanced. If you've got a lot more material left on one side and you put it back the mower, you'll find a mower will judder around. It's difficult to use. So a tip an old gardener showed me years ago is to find any small object like this, even a screwdriver will do, pop it into the middle and literally check it seesaw-like to see if there's a balance. Slightly lower on that side, so it just means I need to take a little bit of material off there to get it to balance. Okay, final check. I think I'm happy with that. Back onto the mower. Now, if you're wondering when to make the first cut on your grass, it will give you a few clues. Over the winter, the snow and rain and wind will have repressed it and pushed it down a bit. As it starts to respond to the sun and light, those blades will just lift up and say they're ready to be cut. The key thing is not to cut it as short as you ordinarily would on that first cut, so just come up a couple of notches from your normal spot. Now, it doesn't want to be a clean up and a sharpened blade. Our mower is now ready to go for the season. Keeping garden tools sharp helps you with all your routine gardening tasks, as well as lengthening the life of your equipment. Back to the trusty vise. Try and bring this hoe back into shape. I'm completely obsessed with having them super sharp. It makes such a difference when you're weeding. It makes life so much easier. So I'm going to look at putting a decent edge back onto this. The sharper a hoe or a spade or any garden implement is, the easier it is for you to use. In other words, you need a lot less labour to push it through the soil. Now, I'm not quite going to manage to shave with this, but it's going to last a good couple of months before it needs another freshen up. Well, that's all the hard work done. By investing just a few hours now, it'll make your gardening year so much easier.
Well, having a good sort out is both good for the garden and good for the soul. Makes you feel virtuous. And now is the time to do it, as it is to start any new big projects. Coming? Come on in. This is where my most ambitious project this year is going to happen. Used to have a greenhouse here. The greenhouse got dilapidated and would cost more to repair than replace, so it's gone. And this is now the opportunity to make a new garden. Last year, I travelled all over the world visiting paradise gardens, and it created a huge impression on me. So, in this space, I want to make my own version, or my own interpretation, of a paradise garden. I've just put this down on paper, scale, that's 1 to 100. So I have my 4 sunken beds, a circular water feature in the middle, going into a square pond or tray, spilling down a rill or run right down the garden, and at the end, at that far end there, a building. Now that's the basis of the garden. Once you've worked out the ideas, there are certain techniques to getting them onto the ground as efficiently and as effectively as possible. Now you will need a tape measure of some kind, a ball of string, the bigger the better, and some canes. What I do is, as garden canes break, I cut them off and I keep them for exactly this purpose. You can get a spray paint that you spray on the ground. The disadvantage of that is that if you want to change it at all, then you've got lines that you have to sort of dig out and erase. This direction, which should be this one here. There. It is important to get the canes in firmly because you're going to be pressurising them with string, so not too flimsy. This is slow and it's a fiddle, but it is really important. So don't feel pressurised to do this sort of thing quickly. I'm really slow at it. It's taken me ages to work the plan out, even though it's so simple. The whole of Longmeadow has been laid out like this. For the last 25 years I've been fiddling around with bits of string and cane and a tape measure and measuring wrong and tying it up wrong and trying again, but gradually you get there and the system does work. 2 foot, how about that? Spot on! Right, that may not look like anything other than some muddy ground with some sticks sticking out of it, but watch. Right, here's the moment of truth. This is where, hopefully, what was an idea on a piece of paper starts to look like reality on the ground. Well, that's the first bed marked out. It's still a long way to go, but it's just a glimmer. But it doesn't matter where your inspiration comes from, you take it where you find it. And last summer, Adam went down to Dorset to visit a garden that was transformed by seeing a garden in Norwich.
Wow, I've literally just come off a busy main road and this is no average front garden. I could well be in the tropics. The atmosphere in this garden is absolutely fantastic. You feel like you could be sort of moving through a jungle, and the planting's really dense but detailed sort of beautifully. And I'm looking around and there's plants that I recognise, but also there's so many in here that I don't. It just leaves me really wanting to find out more. The creator of this suburban paradise is Mike Clifford. It's a stunning garden, mate, but tell me where that sort of passion for exotic started.
It started about 2 years ago. A gentleman called Will Giles in Norfolk who was on the TV and he had a tropical garden. And we didn't grow tropicals at all. We grew heathers and conifers. And we decided to rip the whole garden out.
How did you actually go about designing it?
Well, I actually designed it one wet Sunday afternoon on a piece of paper, and I drew out the scale, and I just tried to maximise the space. So the summer house is right in the corner, we've got a potting shed behind, all the borders interlinked so you can't see where you're going. We're just trying to make the best use of space.
Yeah, because actually, though it's not a big garden, you can get lost at different points as you move
I often
through.
get lost, yeah. My wife's always searching for me down the garden.
So the whole, it's got a bit of a colonial feel down here, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. So this is our homage to Abbotsbury's subtropical tea rooms. So we tried to mimic that look.
You strike me as actually someone that likes to collect.
I do. I love collecting. I love collecting little curiosities. As much as the plants, I like collecting plant-related curiosities as well. So in here I've got some of my favourite plants that I grow as my giant dandelions, Sonchus.
Seed heads, the same look?
Exactly the same as a dandelion. hoping these are going to flower this year. These are 2 years from seed.
And I love the fact that actually most people are trying to get rid of dandelions, mate. You were collecting them.
There's a tapioca plant through there with
yeah.
that beautiful snowflake leaf. It's a stunning plant for having, with this mix of cut leaves. I've got chef fleurs.
Because I think that as a designer, you know, some of the plants I recognise, some I don't. But there's so much interest even without flower, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Where do you get all these seeds and plants from?
At the end of October, November, I'll pack the garden away, and then I'll spend the winter months searching for rare seeds, run a couple of groups on social media, and we all share seeds and plants and cuttings from all over the world. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's the fantastic sort of community, isn't it? Honestly, being built out of that, that same passion for plants.
Absolutely.
It is incredible, really is.
This is an interesting plant. Brachyglottis rapanda.
Wow, that's a mouthful, mate.
Absolutely. Can you guess what its common name's called?
No, go on, what is it?
Bushman's toilet paper.
It is, seriously, is that?
It's used as toilet paper in Australia, yeah.
So you're telling me when you're stuck upstairs and you run out, you send the missus out to pick something?
Just a few leaves, yeah.
Wow. This feels like you could be eating in here, doesn't it?
This is my cold greenhouse. This is full up with ferns and sarracenia and Venus flytraps. Full of
Go about it.
Well, most of the stuff's seed grown, to be honest. A lot of them are seeds or cuttings.
So do you have one mix or 10 mixes for how you propagate your seeds? Or
most of the seeds I grow, the basic stuff, is all done in a general multi-purpose seed compost. I use a peat-based one with perlite.
Wow, and then that literally then sow seed then into heat.
Yes, into heat. I've got several propagators I use, or different ones set at different temperatures. This begonia here is seed grown as well. This is one of the biggest begonias in the world. It's
seriously, they look like they're on steroids, don't they? People are going to think this must cost a fortune, but in reality, you can do this on a budget.
You could do this on a very tight budget. Yes, yeah. Seeds are incredibly cheap, and you could grow a good tropical border for £50 any year.
I think you might be setting yourself a challenge there.
I think I might be. Yeah, I think I might be. So this is my propagation area.
Don't normally let people in here, do you?
No, I don't let anyone in here.
Can I have a look?
Of course you can, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
This is where I do all my begonia leaf cuttings and grow from seed.
So this is, what, Streptocarpus?
That's a unifoliate Streptocarpus dunni, which has a red flower. It's quite unusual, very hard to find seed.
So you knock these out and then just prick them all out?
Prick them all out.
And plant them?
Plant them out into single pots. There's one I've done last week. And off they go.
I tell you what, I feel like a kid in a sweet shop, seriously. If I don't go home with a cough, I'll be upset, I tell you. It's brilliant, superb. You've been on an incredible journey with this garden, and what are you going to do in the future? What are you going to do?
We're opening up our garden again for the National Garden Scheme, so I've already started to label most of the plants that we have around, so when people come to visit, they can see plants, they can look them up, they can take pictures. It encourages them to want to do this sort of gardening, to want to do the exotics.
You know, gardens never cease to amaze me, and I think over the years I've learned to design them, build them and care for them. I feel a bit like a GP. I know a bit about, I suppose a lot of stuff, but you come somewhere like this and he's a specialist, and he's been on this journey and learnt about exotics. I'll be honest with you, it's infectious, and I think for me now, I'm going to go home, I'm going to look at the planting, and maybe I am going to add just a few exotics.
I knew Will Giles a little bit in Norwich, who provided the inspiration for that garden. And it's great to see that Adam is inspired by him, this fabulous garden has been made, and although I don't know about the planting yet here, I've got some ideas, but we'll come to that because there's quite a lot to do first. But you can see we have 4 beds marked out in a square. They will be dug out and sunken. This will be a raised up central area with a bowl in the middle which will have water bubbling out of it. It will overflow into a square retaining basin, which in turn will overflow, run down into a rill. Now, a rill a very, very narrow little canal. We'll run out here. This area is bricked, the rill running through the middle of it, where we can sit and have seats and pots. And here, at the end, with these tall bamboos, is a building. And the rill will run into the building, and there'll be a little pool inside the building. Now, this means that we have a lot of work to do, because apart from buildings and bricks and sunken beds, we've got to fit in water, a pump with electrics to get it flowing round, and all that before I can begin planting. Now, this will take time, but it's something that I can do and share with you over the coming months. But here are some things that you can do this weekend. Now is a really good time to sow beetroot. You can sow them direct outside, but I like to sow them undercover in plugs or coir discs, sowing 2, 3 or even 4 seeds to each one. I don't thin them, grow them on and then plant them out as a group. And this makes them easy to harvest, and also it's a very efficient way to use seed. In many parts of the country, and particularly the warmer south, you can put out citrus that has been kept undercover all winter for protection. Raise the pots up on chocks and give them a really good soak. They will gradually harden off over the coming months, but if it does turn very cold, have some fleece to hand so you can wrap them up overnight. Many of us have cuttings like these Verbena bonariensis taken at the end of last summer. They spent winter undercover, but now it's time to separate them and pot them on. Carefully divide the plants with as much root as possible and put them into a fresh, peat-free compost grown container. Give them some protection, a soak, and they'll rapidly grow into large plants that you can plant out into the garden. Perhaps it's inevitable that after a long winter and a very delayed cold spring, that all of our thoughts are geared towards the future, and certainly in the garden at this time of year, a lot of our work is planning and planting and pruning and shaping so that things look great in summer. Scilla bifolia, which never gets very big, but it is such a beautiful, intense bloom. Even the daffodil is something to be treasured because it will be gone. So I think it's really important that sometimes we just stop and enjoy what we have in the garden for what it is. That's the end of today's programme, but of course I'll be back here at Longmeadow, same time next week for another full hour programme, so join me then. Bye-bye.